commonly known as the second book of the Kings. But back in the olden days, First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings were all one book, and then First, Second Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and Esther used to all be one book too. And so that's where this comes from. Is from the Latin Vulgate, being called the second book of the Kings. And of course, First Kings is commonly called the third book of the Kings. Second Kings is commonly called the fourth book of the Kings. And it's because it's supposed to all be one book. But God later divided it in 1611, and now they're all separate books. And so, and the events of Second Samuel take place around 1056 to 1017 BC, somewhere around there. The years, of course, can vary. It's not absolute. But remember, we're going down to the reign of Solomon, and Solomon started reigning in 1000 BC. And so these is events anywhere from 1055 to 1010, somewhere in there is when these events happen. And so the book has 24 chapters, 695 verses, and 20,612 words. God has a lot to do with, remember, letters, numbers, and images we're speaking on. And so this is the reason why Bible believers bring out these numbers, is God's into that sort of thing. And so I may preach on Bible numerics for the next. I'm just going to give you some steak today. And next week, you guys get a lot of spiritual application anyway. So today will be a day of steak. All right. So the book has 24 chapters, again, 695 if you're taking notes, and 20,612 words. Main character from start to finish is David, Israel's real first king. Saul was the first king, but not by God's choice, remember. He was the people's choice. Well, this is God's first king, and everything is I guess, measured up to David. Saul, they're not measured up to Saul. They're measured up to David, because this is God's choice for the king over Israel. And if the people would have waited, God would have given them David, a man after his own heart. And so David was God's choice, and it's because that David's a type of Christ. Now, in 1 Samuel, we have given, since chapter 16, 58 typologies of Jesus Christ that David appears in 1 Samuel alone. And that's the last half of the book, 58 typologies of Christ. And so we'll continue to number them throughout 2 Samuel and then on into 1 Kings. I think David goes on living for another couple of chapters in 1 Kings. So we'll continue to number the typologies of Jesus Christ. By the way, Joseph and David are the two greatest types of Christ in the Bible. It is said that Joseph is a type of Christ in 150 different ways. I don't know if that's true. We will number them when we get to Joseph. All right? And so that'll be fun to do that. And so just like we're doing, and so it might not be exactly 150, but it'll be probably pretty close. It'll be probably up to where David is at least. And so now, although Joseph is said to be more typologies than David, it is said David's type goes far beyond that of Joseph, not the number of typologies, but David goes beyond Joseph because he quotes like Jesus Christ does. He quotes the words of Christ. When Christ quoted the New Testament, he did it exactly the way David did, almost to the T. And so when David speaks, he speaks as Jesus Christ. And so that is, he speaks in the person of Jesus Christ, speaking of himself. And so for the material on 2 Samuel, now Samuel's dead. He died in chapter 25. So he cannot be the author of 2 Samuel. So the question comes up, who's the author? Well, it is probable, and nobody knows for certain, but it is probable that the two prophets, Nathan and Gad, are responsible for 2 Samuel. And so probably Gad was the one that finished out the book of Samuel. Remember that Samuel was the teacher of the school of the prophets. Gad and Nathan and any other prophets you find in 2 Samuel and 1st to 2nd Kings come out of this school of the prophets. And so among these, and including actually Ezra came out of this school as well. And Ezra is the author of 1st, 2nd Chronicles, as well as Ezra. And so there's a lot of similarities between the Chronicles and the book of Ezra. But as far as 2 Samuel is picked up probably by Nathan and Gad. And Nathan and Gad had both served David as prophets. Both outlived David. Both Gad and Nathan both outlived David. Both wrote accounts related to David's reign, and probably they collaborated into what we have now as 2 Samuel. They probably combined both their accounts into one book. And so the book of Samuel is 1 Samuel. Now look over at 1 Chronicles 29. 1 Chronicles 29. And look at verse 29. 29. Now remember, this is Ezra speaking here. But notice, now the acts of David the king, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of Samuel the seer, which is 1 Samuel. And in the book, see, Samuel the seer has one book. One book. And in the book of Nathan the prophet and in the book of Gad the seer. So there's two, which are probably make up 2 Samuel. We don't know for sure. But every book of Nathan and the book of Gad that I can find out there is written and translated by someone who's a false prophet. There is no true book of Nathan. There is no true book of Gad. And so the person that I have the book in there by this guy that translates the book of Gad and the book of Nathan, and in it he uplifts himself in his own book that he was a prophet too. I'm sorry, I have a problem with that. So it's a false translation is what it is. And so I believe, and I don't know this 100%, that the books of Nathan and Gad were put together to form 2 Samuel. And not only that, if they outlived David, they might have had a hand in 1 Kings. So, and then there's other prophets and scribes that came after Nathan and Gad. And so, now as 1 Samuel marks the failure of man in Eli and Saul and even Samuel, so 2 Samuel marks the restoration of order through the enthroning of God's king David. This book records the establishment of Israel's political center in Jerusalem. Remember, David is the one that takes the stronghold of Zion and calls it after his own, and makes it his own city. And that's 2 Samuel chapter 5. And so her religious center in Zion is 2 Samuel chapter 5 and 6. Now, when this is set, God establishes the Davidic covenant in chapter 7, out of which all kingdom truth is developed. This is where, if you notice, every book of the Bible talks about God's kingdom. All right? It's a literal, physical kingdom of heaven. And God gave it to Adam. Adam lost it. God gave it back to Noah. Noah lost it. God gave it to Abraham. Abraham lost it. Every man. So now it was given to Moses. And Moses lost it because of his sin striking the rock. So he wasn't even able to go into the promised land. And so now God is going to give it to David and to establish the millennial reign or the millennial kingdom, which will be future. But it starts here in David, so there's a lot of similarities doctrinally for the millennial reign as David is sitting on the throne. So you have to keep that in mind. That is a very important thing. And so now when establishes the Davidic covenant and sets up David's kingdom, which David's kingdom will go on and on and on. It's a forever covenant with David, that there will always be a remnant of David that sits upon the throne of Jerusalem. And that's still true today, and it will be true in the millennial reign. And then David, in his last words, describes in chapter 23 of 2 Samuel, David describes the millennial kingdom yet to come. And so that's how we know that that's what God's intent is to do. Now, 2 Samuel is set up in 4 parts. Number 1, 1 Samuel is remembered. 1 Samuel, remember, establishes a transition period from judges to kingship. And so you've got to remember that for 1 Samuel. So the transition's already taken place, but there's another transition coming, and it's going to translate the kingdom from Saul now to David. And so that takes a few chapters. And so the first thing is the death of Saul is to the anointing of David over Judah in Hebron, chapter 1. Number 2, in chapters 2 through 5, you have the translation of the kingdom to David over a united Israel. Israel unites, not just Judah, but all of Israel unites to make David king. And that's in chapters 2 through 5. Number 3, in chapters 6 to 14, is the conquest of Jerusalem to the rebellion of Absalom. And the number 4 is the rebellion of Absalom to the purchase of the new temple, which is chapter 15 to 24. And so those are the 4 parts of 2 Samuel. Now, Absalom is a perfect typology of the Antichrist. And when we get there, we're going to number them, and we're going to call them. We should have numbered how many times Saul came up, as we should have went back and numbered them, how many typologies Saul was of the Antichrist. But Absalom is also a typology of the Antichrist, and we will number them when we get there. According to Ussher, the events of 2 Samuel cover a period of 38 years. And the 2 Samuel covers the last 2 years of David's reign, which overlaps with Solomon's reign. Okay, it wasn't 40 years then Solomon started. No, so oftentimes, as we're going to see in the book of 1 Kings, there was an overlapping of ruling. David wasn't well enough to rule the last 2 years of his life. He was getting old. He was old and well stricken in years. And so Solomon starts to take place there, and that's 2 years before David dies. And when we get there, we'll cover it. Now, there's 22 definite prophecies that appear in 2 Samuel in 68 verses out of 695 verses, which amounts to 10% of the content. 90% of the content is history. 10% is prophecy, and we'll look at that when we get to those places. Now, the events go immediately from Saul to David. Saul has just committed suicide, and his sons have been killed. His body has been made a spectacle to the gods of the Philistines. And then he's been rescued and buried and burned, or rescued, burned, and buried. And the Holy Spirit now turns the details now to David. 2 Samuel chapter 1. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul. So it takes right up where it's left off. After the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag. So David has been back 2 days from the slaughter of the Amalekites. He's gotten back to Ziklag. They're starting to clean the place up. Remember, it was burnt with fire. And they've been back now 2 days. And a man comes walking into the camp, into the city of Ziklag, and he bears bad news. And that's where we pick it up here. Now, we already know what the news is, but David doesn't know that yet. Now, Saul's dead, but David doesn't know that. A man comes in, he tells a lie. We know it's a lie. David didn't know it was a lie. David knows only what he's being told here. But it still signs the Amalekite's death wish. Of course, that's not what the Amalekite was looking for. But this is what's going on here. So you got to keep these things in mind as we read the story. And so, now, and remember that Saul has committed suicide in battle to keep from being tortured again. Although his body was made a spectacle of anyway. And while this is going on, David's in Ziklag, south of Judah, where he's recovered his wives, and he's recovered the families of 600 men. Now, that was quite a company, if you think about it, that he recovered. That's over 1,000 women and children. I mean, that's quite a spoil that the Amalekites took. And so David rescues all of them, and he's rescued everything. And then he's taken all the spoil also. And so David did a great thing here. David is the hero of the story. And so now David is recuperating from the battle, maybe getting his camp together and cleaning things up, cleaning all the wood, maybe making and putting up new structures maybe. They've got to make it a home. He doesn't know that he's going to be king soon. And so that's what's going on when these events take place. Now, verse 1, now it came to pass after the death of Saul, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had abode 2 days in Ziklag, it came even to pass on the third day, that behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent, and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth and did obeisance, or obeisance. So this guy's clothes are torn, which back then was a sign of mourning. Now, earth upon his head is the other sign of mourning. That means this guy's clothes is not torn because of battle. Okay, there's a big difference here. And now we would wonder if it didn't have that earth was on his head. Okay, and so having earth upon his head also shows that there's a sign of mourning going on. And so it looks like that this guy is the sole survivor of Saul's company, or he was among the Philistines that were there to strip the slain. Okay, and so notice this guy came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent. So he could have been part of the company of Saul. I don't think so. It said back there that they all died. So it looks like this guy might have been among those that was stripping the slain. Because notice what he has with him. What does he come with? I'll look down at verse. It says that he brought the crown and his bracelet. It says on down. Let's see, verse 8, 9. Look, there it is, verse 10. I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm. This guy's a thief. He's a robber. He was among them that stripped the slain. He kind of tells on himself here. And so this obeisance here in verse 2, he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And so that's where our word obey comes from. He puts himself under David's submission here, all with the ulterior motive of getting some kind of reward. Okay, I mean, you're going to do what you have to do in order to get something, and that's what this guy is doing. But obeisance is to show deep respect or reverence. This guy might have respected David. Of course, he knew who David was. He knew where he's dwelling. During this time, he comes right to Ziklag. And so, but obeisance most of the time in the Bible is an act of worship. And remember, we talked about kissing the Son. It says in Psalm chapter 2. A lot of times when obeisance is done, they usually grab the feet and kiss the feet or something. And so, this is what this guy is doing. And so the Jews and the people in the Middle East today still do these things. And it's to show extreme sorrow. They do a number of things. They would tear their clothes. They would put dust or ashes on their head. And that figures death. All right, it's a typology of death is what is going on. It's sorrowing because someone else has died. It has to do with death. Being buried under the earth, and dust to dust and ashes to ashes. And the tearing of the clothes is a picture of the flesh. In the book of Hebrews, it says that he went through the veil that is his flesh. So the clothing and everything, when you tear your clothing, it's a sign of putting the flesh away, tearing the flesh, saying no to the flesh. That's what it pictures today. And when Christ's flesh was torn on the cross, the veil in heaven was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. It's a typology. It's because it figures what was going on in heaven, figures what was going on the cross. And so it's a picture being tearing the veils, a picture of his flesh. Now, verse 3, and David said unto him, now here in this whole course of the study, you'll find David asks 5 questions, which 5 is the number of death. So it winds up with the Amalekite dying. And so you've got to ask these questions to find out the truth. And so verse 3, and David said unto him, from whence comest thou? And he said unto him, out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. So it makes it sound like he's come out of Saul's company, but it said back there that everyone with Saul died. So number 1 lie here, out of the camp of Israel am I escaped. And David said unto him, how went the matter? In other words, we say, how did it go? Or how goes it? Or what happened? That's our terminology today. And he answered that the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also. And so, okay, so verse 5, let's see. All right, let's continue reading. And David said unto the young man that told him, how knowest thou that Saul and Jonathan his son be dead? And the young man that told him said, as I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, behold, Saul leaned upon his spear. That's a lie. He did not lean upon his spear. See, we're told back there he fell upon his sword. And so, obviously, he's lying here. He's telling a story. And he just happened to by chance upon Mount Gilboa, which means he wasn't from the Saul's company. See, he kind of tells on himself here. And so he lied about coming out of the camp of Saul. Other than he did take the bracelet and everything, which he stumbled into the camp. And now notice here that this man in his story is chasing Saul. Verse 6, he says, I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa. Behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me. See, they're chasing him. They're chasing Saul. And called unto me, and I answered, here am I. And he said unto me, who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. So this whole thing reeks of a big lie here. Saul did not lean upon his spear. He fell on his sword. Now go back to chapter 31 and look at verse 4. It says, then said Saul unto his armor bearer, draw thy sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So this armor bearer is the witness that Saul had already died. Therefore, he took his own life too. Now, he's not a living witness, obviously, but you have the Holy Spirit tell you that he noticed he was dead. And now notice what this guy, this Amalekite, says here. He said unto me again, verse 9, stand, I pray thee, upon me and slay me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. In other words, Saul's not dying. That his life is still whole in him. That he's doing good, although he's leaning upon his spear. So, but according to the story back there, he's dead already. So you can see that this story's a lie. Now, it's funny that an Amalekite would show up here. Isn't that something? I mean, Saul was supposed to kill all the Amalekites. He didn't do it. David slaughtered the Amalekites and saved a servant of the Amalekites. And now here's an Amalekite that shows up trying to get a reward that says that he's killed. So this thing is already going against him, against this guy. He's an Amalekite. According to the law, God said when you take over the land of Canaan to wipe out the Amalekites, their sin is full. Saul didn't do that. David has tried a couple of different times to do that. And so it's funny how an Amalekite shows up here. And so notice that David is asking questions also. So he's trying to find out the truth of what's going on. Now, Saul has one way of dealing with Amalekites, but notice David's way. Slaughter, back in verse 1, the slaughter of the Amalekites. Now, verse 8, and he said unto me, who art thou? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. And he said unto me again, now he's told David that Saul has asked him who he was, and he told Saul that he was an Amalekite. Now, why didn't Saul kill the Amalekite if this story is true? No, he wants the Amalekite to kill him according to the story. And he said unto me again, stand, I pray thee, upon me and slay me, for anguish has come upon me because my life is yet whole in me. So I stood upon him and slew him because I was sure that he could not live after he was fallen. And so he was injured already, according to him. He didn't think he could live. But Saul said, my life is yet whole in me. So the story is contradictory here. And I took the crown that was upon his head and the bracelet that was on his arm and have brought them hither unto my Lord. All right, so the Amalekites, remember, are a type of the flesh. When we went through the story in 1 Samuel chapter 15, we made a mention that the Amalekites are a type of the flesh. Notice how the flesh will lie to you. Isn't that something? And doesn't your flesh lie to you all the time? Boy, mine does. It lies to me all the time. Not only that, but the flesh is a thief. It'll steal from your spiritual walk and have you walk in the flesh instead. It's a thief. And this Amalekite came to strip the slain. That's exactly what your flesh will do. Strip that which is dead. Aren't you supposed to be dead to self? And yet your flesh keeps stripping the slain and bringing it back. A lot of good typology here. Now, in verse 8, this Amalekite was among them, notice. Verse 8, he says, who art thou? I answered him, I am an Amalekite. He says, stand, I pray thee. So he's asking, this guy's following along with the Philistines that are following hard after Saul. So this Amalekite's among them, among the Philistines. And this Amalekite obviously knows David and his men because he comes straight to David, hoping for a reward. So he grabs the crown and he grabs Saul's bracelet and brings him to David. And that's what the flesh will do. It'll strip the slain. The Amalekite hopes for credit for killing Saul, who's been trying to kill David for at least 2 to 3 years. And you know what your flesh likes? Your flesh likes rewards. Right? We're always looking for ways to have a reward for our actions or for our work, our works. It likes rewards. And so this Amalekite lies for gain, to benefit from it. And that's what our flesh does. It'll lie for gain and to try to benefit from it. This Amalekite tries to make David a king before his time. He brings him the crown and the royal bracelets to put upon David. And Satan tried that, remember? He showed the Lord all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. He's trying to make the Lord the king before his time. That's number 59th typology of Christ for David. What? That's what the flesh tries to do. Satan tried to make Christ the Lord, the king of all the kingdoms of the world. But it wasn't time yet. And you know, that's the way your flesh will try to do. It'll try to set up David's kingdom to take the crown before the cross. See, Christ came the first time to die on the cross. But there was always someone that was trying to make him king first, out of order. Now verse 11. Verse 11, then David took hold on his clothes and rent them, and likewise all the men that were with him, and they mourned and wept and fasted until even for Saul and for Jonathan his son and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. So David showing extreme sorrow here. But notice how they mourned and wept and fasted until evening. Now, in verse 13, right there has a paragraph marking. You see that? Now, the indication here is that verse 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, David continues dealing with the Amalekite. So having a paragraph marking here shows you that actually in chronology, verse 13 to 16 follows verse 10. And then after those, now remember, God does this a lot. We showed the story about Saul and Nahash the Ammonite, how that was an instance there that God shows you a story and it goes back in time to tell it. Remember, we went through that. This is what God does. A lot of times we've seen that in Genesis over and over again, how God will mention something and then continue with the thought of that same in chronology with it. So 11 and 12 take place after verse 16, after the Amalekite's dead. And David said unto the young man that told him, whence art thou? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. Now, David already knows the answer to this question. He asked the question to affirm if this guy's story is going to change or if he really is an Amalekite. Why? Because he being an Amalekite, he's already signed his death warrant. God's told him to kill the Amalekites. So this guy's on his way to death already. And so he wants to make sure that he's an Amalekite. So he asks the question again. And so in 13 and 14, David asks the last two questions, totaling a total of 5, which signs the death warrant for the Amalekite. Now, David has a right to ask these last two questions. Let's read them. Verse 13, and David said unto the young man that told him, whence art thou? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said unto him, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Boy, these are two hard questions. Now, the first one you would think is easy, but number one, he's got to make sure he's an Amalekite. Number two, David practiced what he preached. Remember, David said, I will not stretch forth mine hand against God's anointed. And so, because this guy did, he's going to pay the penalty for it. And so, he killed the Lord's anointed, and it's a life for a life. That's the way it was in the Old Testament. Since he said that he killed Saul, then he's going to die for it. And if he didn't kill Saul, he's going to die anyway according to the law because he's supposed to wipe out the Amalekites. So that's the lesson here. When David had a chance to slay Saul, he said, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? So this Amalekite has done it. Therefore, he's going to pay. He's although he is innocent, he's going to die with the guilty because by his own mouth he's done it. 1 Samuel 26:10 says, David said, furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. All three came to pass. Especially the last one. He shall descend into battle and perish. Notice there was 3 ways Saul could have died, and actually the Lord brought it together where all 3 came to pass. David left it to the Lord to do it. David wasn't going to be guilty of taking the life. This Amalekite's guilty. If Saul were to take his own life, then that would be better than man doing it, right? And so here, David asks these two questions, and he says, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And David called one of the young men and said, go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. So there's the third reason right there. Because, buddy, you testified to it. He didn't really do it, but he said he did. So he paid the penalty for it. And so David honors what he's talked about all along. He takes care of the person that says that he killed the Lord's anointed, and he takes care of the problem. And then the guy's an Amalekite, and God said to destroy the Amalekites, utterly destroy him. And David has gotten back from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and here's another one that comes to him. By his own hand, he dies. And so this was the divine right of a king to have someone fall upon him to die. That's what it is. The kings of that age, that's what they did. This is where we got it from in the Dark Ages. Back in the Dark Ages, when a king or someone in high authority said, fall upon him, they went and did it. Why? It's a monarchy. It's a monarchy. And that's what the monarchy of King James was. What King James said came to pass. Whether he prophesied it, all right, or whether he had men translate the Bible, or whether someone by their own admission were to die. By the word of a king, there's power. And you don't want to forget that, because we're going to tie in a lot of King James stuff in with King David. There's a lot of typologies that King David was a type of King James too, who was a type of the Lord Jesus Christ. Don't listen to the lies. King James was not a sodomite. That is a lie straight from Satan. He was the man God used. He was a saved man. And he was a man God used to write this Bible. Amen? And we'll get into that as we go on through 2 Samuel. There's a lot here. But we're going to end it right there, and we're going to take a break. So let's take a break. We'll come back at 11 o'clock for the next service.